It's nice. All right, good morning, everybody. We are Lamed Daled Amud Beis. We are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines from the bottom. Last word on the page is Bishlam. So we talked about this yesterday. We talked about this the day before. One of the themes of the last bunch of days is we had a stira between the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in our parak, that gave a list of women that if a person was ma'anis, would have to pay a knas. On the list of those women, the psulim were certain chayve krisos. And we had a stira because there was a Mishnah in Maseches Makos that said with a similar list of women, chayve krisos, if a person was ma'anis them, he would be subject to malchus. And we know there's a general klal, ein lokin and mishalmin. So how do we reconcile these two mishnayos? And the Gemara had a number of different approaches. The two that we're going to focus on today was Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan's approach was to say that you're right. Normally, ein lokin and mishalmin, and therefore, if a person does something where he would be chayiv malchus and he'd be chayiv mammon, ordinarily he would be chayiv malchus. However, over here, how do you understand the Mishnah in Ksubis? You're going to have to make an ukimta that the reason why the person's chayiv mammon and not malchus is because there was no hasra. Where there's no hasra, you're not going to be chayiv the malchus, you're going to be chayiv the mammon. Reish Lakish had a different approach. Reish Lakish said, no, I actually don't think this is a stira at all. Really, I'll tell you that both mishnayos are shittas Rav Meir. Rav Meir says, lokin and mishalmin, that in fact, you can get both malchus and mammon, and therefore there's no stira on the two mishnayos. The Mishnah in Ksubis is Rav Meir, and the Mishnah in Makos is Rav Meir. So we're going to pick up on that note. The Gemara says, Bish, Lama Rav Yochanan lo Amar Reish Lakish. I can understand why Rav Yochanan didn't want to understand the sugya like Reish Lakish, the Kamokim Karabanan. Rabbi Yochanan, he's going to say that the stira is not a stira, right? He's not going to say that mishnayos are Rav Meir. He's going to say it's like the Rabbanan, which I guess we always want to say. It's always better to put it as the Rabbanan as opposed to a Das Yachid. Ella Reish Lakish, my time Rabbi Yochanan. Why did Reish Lakish feel the need to answer this kasha by saying that's Rav Meir as opposed to answering it like Rav Yochanan? Amar Lecha, Rav Yochanan, or Reish Lakish will say, Kevan ilu asruvei pater, kilo asruvei nami pater. Reish Lakish says, I have a completely fundamental different understanding of Shittas Chachamim. The way Reish Lakish understands the Chachamim is he would say, you're right. Ein lokin and mishalmin, and therefore, if a person does something where you're chayav malchus and mammon, you're going to be chayav the malchus. All right, the Reish Lakish says, but according to the Shittas Chachamim, if for whatever reason a person wouldn't be chayav the malchus, meaning let's say there wasn't hasra, or he did something mashogeg, you wouldn't be chayav the mammon, you would just be pater legamre. So once you're pater from the mammon because you would have been chayav malchus, even in a situation where you wouldn't be chayav the malchus because of some technicality, you wouldn't be chayav the mammon either. And therefore, Reish Lakish says, I couldn't understand the stira between the Mishnah here in Ksubis and the Mishnah in Makos by saying this to Chachamim because I can never come up with a scenario where you'd be chayav the knas. So that's the fundamental machlokas, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And it's going to be throughout the daf today, so it's kind of important to really get this machlokas down. The machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is in Shittas Chachamim. When a person does something where you're chayav malchus and mammon, but for whatever reason you can't be chayav the malchus because you didn't get asra or you did it b'shogeg, Rabbi Yochanan says then the mammon would kick in and you'd be chayav the mammon. Reish Lakish says no. Once you were pater the mammon because you were in theory chayav the malchus, you're always going to be pater the mammon. So that's this machlokas of Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and therefore Reish Lakish had to come up with a different way of reconciling the stira, and he came on to Shittas Rav Meir. Okay. So the Gemara says, this way of understanding the machlokas of Yochanan and Reish Lakish is consistent with the machlokas somewhere else. He also Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, he reported as follows. He said, Amar chayve misos shogigin, b'chayve malkios shogigin, b'davar achar. So it's really two separate cases. He said, if you have a person who's chayiv misa b'davar, chayiv misa b'shogeg b'davar achar, or chayiv malkus b'shogeg b'davar achar. The davar achar over here meaning money, meaning a person does something where he's chayiv misa b'shogeg and he's also chayiv money, or a person does something where he's chayiv malkus b'shogeg but he's also chayiv money. Rashi points out over here that when we say shogeg is lavdavka, it just means he wouldn't actually get the malchus or the mammon, i.e., there wasn't valid hasra. That's how Rashi understands. You look at Rashi, second to last line, first words on the page, shogegin, shalom hasru behen. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rav Yochanan Amar Chayiv, Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Just like we explained. So Rav Yochanan would say in that case, if you can't get the Misa or if you can't get the Malchus, so you're going to be Chayiv the Mammon. Reish Lakish says no Pater. Rav Yochanan Amar Chayiv, wide Holo Asrabe. Rav Yochanan says, listen, ordinarily, if you're Chayiv Misa and Mammon, you'd get the Misa, not the Malchus. But over here, where you didn't get Hasras, you're not going to be Chayiv the Misa, so the Mammon kicks in. Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Reish Lakish says no, it's Pater. Kavan the Ilu Asrabe Pater, because if in theory you would have gotten the Asra, you would have been Chayiv the Misa or the Malchus, you would have been Pater. Kilo Asrabe. So then even when there's a technicality and you're not Chayiv the Misa or the Malchus, i.e., you didn't get the Hasra or whatever it is, Nami Pater. Reish Lakish Rav Yochanan, and Reish Lakish asked the Kasha to Rav Yochanan. This is a pasuk that we saw, from a few days ago. We're very familiar. The pasuk says this is in Mishpatim. Below yeh ason anoshi enei. So the context of the psukim is you have two people fighting, and a pregnant lady comes along, and the person, unfortunately hits the pregnant lady and terminates her fetus. And the pasuk says, im lo yeh ason. If there's no death, anoshi enei, the person has to pay the demei vlados. But the implication is, if she were to die, then you wouldn't pay the money. So Reish Lakish asks to Rav Yochanan, my lava son mamish, right? Turn the page, Lamed Hey and Aleph. Isn't that exactly what the pasuk's saying? If you were to kill the woman, you'd be patur the money. Now we don't know that this person's chasra. We don't know if this person's chayiv misa. All we know is that the woman's dead, and it sounds like in all scenarios, when the woman's dead, the mazik is going to be patur from paying the tmei vlados. So it seems like a kash on Rav Yochanan's way of understanding. Rav Yochanan says, "Lo, you're understanding wrong. It's not a son mamish, din a son. You're focusing on the woman, her dying. The pasuk, that's not where the pasuk's focus is. The pasuk is on the mazik himself. And what the pasuk is saying is, if the person who killed the woman, if he's put to death, i.e., he's chayav misa because there was valid asra, in that case, the person will be patur from the mammon. But if the person's not chayav misa because, let's say, there wasn't asra, whatever the scenario is, then even if the woman dies, the person is going to be chayav the mammon. Ika de Amri, there was another version of how this exchange went down, but instead of Reish Lakish asking Rav Yochanan, this was Rav Yochanan asking on Reish Lakish. Esbe Rav Yochanan on the Reish Lakish. Below yeh ason, again, we have the same pasuk. Anoshi anesh, my lab din ason. This is now Rav Yochanan asking Reish Lakish, how do you understand the pasuk? Shouldn't you understand the pasuk that what the pasuk is basically coming to say is that if the person is chayiv misa because there was a valid asra or whatever it is, then he's patur. But if the person wasn't chayiv misa, he's going to be chayiv to pay the moment, even if he kills this woman, and it's a riot or a Yochanan Kash on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, no, ason mamish. That's not the way to understand it. It's the way to understand the way we've been understanding until now, that you're only going to be chayiv the mammon if you don't kill the woman. You only terminate the fetus. But if you kill the woman, then you're going to be patur from paying the money. Okay. So the bottom line is, we spent a lot of time kicking off this stuff. We really focus on this machlokas with Yochanan and Reish Lakish that really involved the case of Malchus and Mammon. Comes along Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi comes from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, and he reports, he says, Azdula Tamayu, the same machlokas applies not only to Malchus, but only in the case of Misa. And then we had this exchange between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding the pregnant lady case. But Amar Rava comes in and he really asks more on Rav Dimi, the way he understood the machlokas rather than the machlokas itself. Is that are you really going to tell me that this machlokas from Reish Lakish extends even to a case of Misa and Mammon? Meaning, I understand Malchus and Mammon. That I understand. But you're going to tell me that Rav Yochanan even says in the case of Misa and Mammon that where there's no Misa, a person is going to be chayiv the Mammon. But Tana de Bechizkiah, we have we have this brisa from, I guess, Chizkiah's Beis Medrash, and the brisa said as follows: Maka Adam. Umaka behema. The pasuk says Umaka behema yishalmena Umaka Adam Yamus. This is at the end of Parshas Emor. The pasuk juxtaposes someone injuring an animal to someone injuring a person, really killing a person. Ma maka behema, and the hekesh is as follows: Ma maka behema. Just like when a person injures an animal, lo chilaktabo bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein miskavin, the she'ein miskavin, bein derech yirida, the derech aliyah, l'pocher moment, l'chayv moment. If you injure an animal, it doesn't matter the circumstances. You could have been shogeg, you could have been amazed, you could have meant to, you could have not meant to. Derech aliyah and derech yirida. This actually has to do with when you kill someone b'shogeg, whether you go to Arei Miklat or not depends on whether you did it derech aliyah or you did it derech yirida. So not super relevant to killing an animal or injuring an animal. But the point is, they're just thrown in the kitchen sink. if you hurt an animal, the circumstances don't matter. You're always going to be chayiv mama. There's no circumstance where you can be patur when you hurt an animal. So too, that's the hekash of the pasuk. Af maka adam, when a person kills a person, lo tachlok bo bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid bein miskavin she'ein miskavin b'derech ridol derech aliyah l'chai bein mamon el potra mamon. If you kill a person, it doesn't matter the scenario. Shogeg, mezid, miskavin, ein miskavin. You're always going to be patur mamon. You're obviously not going to be chayiv misa. You're only going to be chayiv misa if you did it with mezid, if you did it with asra, if you had kavana, this and that. But the point is the hekash of the pasuk, and this is what Chizkiah taught in his brayso, that the pasuk had a hekash between Makkah behema and Makkah Adam, to say that in the same way that when you injure an animal, the circumstances don't matter, you're always going to be chayav mamon. In the same way, when you kill a person, the circumstances don't matter, you are always going to be patur mamon. So Rav has a kasha on Rav Dimi. How could you tell me that Rav Yochanan shita is that when a person's chayav nisa and mamon, and he can't be chayav nisa because there was no asra, you're going to be chayav the mamon? It goes against the Mefursha Praisa from Chizkiah that said not that way. He had a hekash in the pasuk that it was not that way. Ella, the Gemara says, Ki Asur Ravin. So Ravin was one of the other Amoraim that traveled back and forth from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. And when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, he had a different version. He said, Chayve Misa Shogegin, in the case of where someone is a Chayiv Misa B'Shogeg or whatever, he didn't get Asra. The point is, a person killed someone, but he can't get Chayiv Misa. Kul Yamala Pligi, both Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, Dipaturin. You're not going to be Chayiv the moment. Ki Pligi, like we started off the daf, when do they argue? B'Chayve Malchus Shogegin B'Davar Achar. It's only when a person's Chayiv Malchus and money. Rav Yochanan Amar Chayiv. Rav Yochanan says Chayiv. Why? Because Chayiv Misos Iskush, Chayiv Malchus Lo Iskush. Because again, in this brisa of Chizkiah, the hekesh between Adam and Behema was only with respect to Misa. That's where we say that when a person kills someone, he's never chayav mamon, but that doesn't apply to Malchus. Reish Lakish Amar Pater, Reish Lakish disagrees. He says, no, even when a person's only chayav Malchus and he can't get the Malchus, is going to be Pater from mamon. Why? Because the Farish Riv Satorah chayav Malchus chayav Misos. Because you're right, the hekesh of Chizkiah was only focused on Misa, not Malchus. But I have another limud that specifically compares or includes Malchus with Misa, and therefore the same way when you kill a person, you're never chayav mamon. So too, when you're chayav Malchus, you're never going to be chayav mamon. So the Gemara asks the obvious follow-up: Heichon Riv Satorah. Okay, Reish Lakish, and show your cards. You're telling me that Beferish, that I know the hekesh of Chizkiah. That's Mefurish. That's Misa, and that's Behema. But you're telling me that Beferish Riv Satorah Malchus where? So Amar Abaya, Asya Rasha. It's like Zera Shav. The pasuk says. And regarding a rotzeach, the pasuk says, "In bamidbar lo sitlu kofer lenefesh rotzeach." You should never take, if a person's on death row, he can't buy his way out. Asher hu rasha, the pasuk calls him a rasha, and in the context of Malchus, the pasuk says, "V'im bin hakos harasha." So we have Xera Shava. So the way Abaya understands is kind of a three-step process. We have the hekesh of Debei Chizki, which says that an animal, if you hurt an animal, you're always chayiv mamon. The hekesh says, but when you kill a person, you're always pater from mamon. And then we have a Xera Shava that compares Misa to Malchus to say that whenever you're chayav Malchus, you're always going to be pater mamon. That's the way Abaya understood Reish Lakish. Amar Rava had a different approach. He said, Asa Maka. He said, I don't need this like three-prong Behema to Misa to Malchus. I'll tell you no. The way Reish Lakish understood, he had a different libud, Maka to Maka, in the same way that there was a hekesh. Chizkiah's hekesh was Maka to compare Behema to Misa. I have a lima that compares Behema to Malchus. So somewhere I have a pasuk where it refers to Malchus as Maka. So I'm really a couple of Rava. So Rava says, Rava, like, where exactly is your source? You're telling me this exists, that there's this Maka from Behema to Malchus. Hi Maka, like where is this word? Elema, maybe you'll tell me it's the pasuk of Chizkiah's hekesh. Umaka Behema Yishalmena, Umaka Adam Yomos. You must. But he says the obvious question. Public Talixit. That pasuk wasn't referring to Malchus. That pasuk was referring to Misa. Ella Hi Maka. So he says, you're right. I have a different source. The pasuk says, and there's only a few pasukim earlier, Maka Nefesh Behema Yishalmena. The pasuk says it's actually talking if you kill an animal. If you kill an animal, you'll have to pay. Nefesh Tachas Nefesh. And the very next pasuk happens to be the Ish Kitain Mumba Amiso Kasher Asa Kenya Salo. It's talking about Chova the Chavero. So Smicha is right. The very next pasuk, and therefore that would be the limit. But the Gemara has two kashas, right? The first one is a pretty obvious one. The halav makahi. The pasuk, very good. The pasuk is talking about chova b'chaver. It doesn't use the word makkah, right? Here you're telling me we have this makkah. So I see the first makkah. I don't see the second makkah. So that Rava answers, anon haka community. You're right. It's not a shava. I mean, I don't even use the word makkah. It's the concept, right? It's talking about someone hitting an animal, and you're hitting a person. But the Gemara asks the next, and again, this is Geshmak. If you remember the sugyas from earlier in the week, Baha kik siv, but that pasuk that you're referring to, the second pasuk is b'chova b'chaveru hu siv. That's talking about where a person injures his friend. B'chova b'chaveru bar tashlumin, right? Even according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you remember earlier in the week, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said that when there's a person who's chayav malchus and mammon, Rabbi Yochanan held that the person's chayav malchus and not mammon. But there were two cases where beferish rivsa Torah that you're chayav mammon and not malchus, chova b'chavero and edom zomin. And this is the makar. This is those psukim of chova b'chavero. So how are you telling me that this is Reish Lakish's, hekesh or limud or whatever it is to compare behema to malchus, and you're using the psukim of chova b'chavero? Chova b'chavero doesn't have malchus. Chova b'chavero specifically is mammon and not malchus. So how could you use this pasuk? So the Gemara says, again, if you have to go back to a few days ago, and if you recall, these psukim, we had these psukim on Lam and Beis and Beis. It was really two separate psukim, right? The way we learned that chova b'chavero is chayav mammon and not malchus was we used two psukim that are right next to each other. The first pasuk says v'ishkit mumba miso kasher asa keni asa lo, and the next pasuk said shever taka shever ayin tas ayin shein taka shein kasher yitain mumba adam keni nasen bo. And the Gemara said, I don't understand. Why do we need keni nasen bo? You just told me in the previous pasuk you have to pay. Why are you saying it again? And the pasuk said, that's what's coming to teach me davar hanite miyad liyad and your chayav mammon. So the Gemara answers like this. You're right. The concept chova b'chavero is mammon and not malchus. But it took us two psukim to get us there. So here's what I'll tell you. The second pasuk, that's the pasuk that teaches me your chayav the mammon. That leaves the first pasuk open to interpretation. And I'll tell you the first pasuk, that's what's coming to teach me that in a case where you wouldn't be chayav the mammon, why? Because the damage that you did was not shava pruta, you'll be chayav the malchus. So let's see it inside. The Gemara answers, you're right, it's a bar tashlumin, but eno inyan lahakash yesh bo shava pruta. But if I don't need the pasuk to teach me that there's tashlumin when the damage that you did, it was more than shava pruta, i.e., I have the next pasuk to teach me that. Taneyu inyan lahakash ema shava pruta. I can use this first pasuk to teach me a case where you were chova b'chavero, but the damage was less than a shava pruta, and therefore you're not going to be chayav mammon. So you'll be chayav malchus. So now we have, this is Reish Lakish's limud. We have makkah behema. The very next pasuk is talking about chova b'chavero, but chova b'chavero in a scenario where you'd be chayav malchus, and therefore that's Reish Lakish's limud. That just like when you're makkah behema in every scenario you're chayav to pay mammon, so too when you do a chova b'chavero in every scenario where you're chayav malchus, you're going to be putter from mammon. Turn the page. But the Gemara asks a very interesting question that says, okay, so if you're telling me that this is going to be your makor, this pasuk of chova b'chavero is going to be your makor, that you're chayav malchus, but in a scenario where you're not chayav malchus, i.e., let's say there was no hasra, you're also not going to be chayav mammon. The Gemara asks an interesting kasha. You just told me, you just made this ukimta, that this pasuk is dealing in a scenario where the hakah that you did is akasha ein bo shava pruta. If you're not chayav the malchus because you didn't have asra, you're not going to be chayav mammon either. You didn't damage the person, right? We just said the case was ein bo shava pruta. So what are you even telling me? So the Gemara says you're right, right? The Gemara says so lav bar tashlumin. The Gemara says you're right. You have to make another ukintul. Tzricha debahadi demachaya kara shirayin delay. While you hit him, and you're right, the hitting itself didn't lead to any damages. It was less than shava pruta, but you also tore his clothing. So it's not so. So the malchus is because you hit someone. That's against the law in the Torah. So there would be malchus. So your point is there wouldn't be malchus because let's say the guy didn't get asra. Meaning if you hit someone and you didn't cause him any physical damage, there would be malchus in the sense that you did a lot. If there was no hasra, then what the pasuk is telling me is I'm not chayav the mammon either. You might say, well, of course you're not chayav the mammon. You didn't damage the person, but you did damage the person because you ripped his suit. So imagine you punch a guy in the shoulder. I think I wasn't really all that hurt, but you tore his suit. So you would think, all right, I'm chayav the mammon. Comes along this lima that says, no. In this case, because ordinarily I would have been chayiv the malchus, but I'm not chayiv the malchus for whatever reason. I'm also not chayiv the mamon. Okay, a little confusing. It's about to get a lot more confusing. So buckle in. So buckle up. So Amarle Rav Chia l'Rabba, just a real geshmaka question right now. So going back to the top of last Amud, we had this hekesh of Chizkiah. It's worth just repeating it again. What the hekesh of Chizkiah was that in the same way that when you damage an animal, in every scenario, regardless, you're always going to be chayiv to pay the mammon. So too, when you kill a person, regardless of the scenario, you're always going to be putter from the mammon. But this hekesh, if you can find a hechatimsa where you can damage an animal and you're putter, you took the wind out of the sails of the entire hekesh, right? So we'll speak it out outside first. The Gemara is going to ask, well, how do you know that every single case where you damage an animal, you're chayiv mammon? What if you damage the animal on Shabbos with asra, right? Shech an animal, right? You're over skila. You wouldn't be chayiv the mammon, right? So doesn't that undo our entire hekesh? So the way the Gemara asks the question is like this: how are you so certain that the hekesh is referring to, or the pasuk is referring to, a case where you did this damage on a weekday, and therefore and therefore you don't have a hechatimsa where a person can be pater? Maybe the pasuk is referring to a case on Shabbos. That even in a case of behema, I can find a case where a person's pater from the mammon, not chayiv in the mammon, and that'll undo our entire hekesh. So the Gemara answers lo salkadai. It can't be talking about Shabbos. It has to be talking about a weekday. How do I know? Because the pasuk says, if you damage an animal, you have to pay. Umaka adam, you must. And if you kill a person or damage a person, you must. You're going to die. So we put to death. So hey chidami, what is this case? Idelo asrube. If there was no hasra, so then maka adam you must. Then if the person killed a person, why is he subject to the death? Right? Ela pshita the asrus. You're going to have to tell me the cases where there was hasra. Now, if Shabbos, and if you're telling me this is Shabbos, again, we have the other kasha. Maka behemi shalmena. Maka behemi shalmena. How are you imposing a chiyuv mammon if a person did a chilul Shabbos? So you're going to have to tell me that there was hasra, and therefore you're going to have to tell me it was a weekday, and that's how the hekesh works. The hekesh works because in every single scenario where this happens on a weekday, you're always going to be chayiv mammon when you're an animal, and therefore you're always going to be pater from mammon when you kill a person. Sorry. So now, all right. Papa Labaya. So this goes back to yesterday's daf, and we had going back even earlier, right? We had this stira that we opened today's daf with, right? We had a stira between the sugya, the Mishnah in Ksubas, and the Mishnah in Palkus. And the way Reish Lakish wanted to understand the stira was he said it's not a stira at all. It's all within Shitas Rav Meir. But if you remember, then we had other issues in Rav Meir, and we had to come on because we had an issue with a brisa when a person's gone off a tavach Shabbos and chayav the dal behay. Reish Lakish understood, and he basically said you had a shliach that did the zvicha. And that's how he got out of it. But Rava had a different approach. Rava's approach, and we did this in yesterday's daf, Rava's approach was that no, even though Rav Meir technically and theoretically holds of the concept of kimle did Rava mineh, but when the mammon is not a din mammon, it's a din knas, even if you're chayiv misa, Rav Meir is going to say you're chayiv the knas. That's how Rava wanted to understand the stira. We spoke out in the shir yesterday. Rashi already alluded. He said in the Gemara later on, it's going to ask a kasha, how in the world can that answer the stira? Because our case is a case involving knas. In fact, the Mishnah that we're going to see tomorrow specifically mentions that when a person's ma'anis, his daughter, which is a chayv priestess, you're not chayiv the knas. Well, so how does this all work out? So the Gemara is going to ask this kasha right now. So Amalei Papa Labaya. The Rabbah, the Amar Chiddush Shchitcha Torah, according to Rabbah, who basically wanted to understand that he said the Torah is mechadesh beknas, that ba'af al gav de mikdal, even where a person is put to death, mishalem, notwithstanding kim levid Rabbah minei, he's still going to be chayav to pay the knas. Masnisim kaman mokim. Who is the author of our Mishnah? Ikra Meir. If you're going to tell me it's Rav Meir, kasha bito can't be Rav Meir, because again the next Mishnah specifically says that you're not chayav the knas on when you're ma'anis your daughter, and if it was Rav Meir, you should be, because again, even though notwithstanding kim levid Rabbah minei, but you should be chayav the knas, so it can't be Rav Meir. So it's a good kash. You'd be paying yourself. Well, not if it's. if
money goes to father.
so it's a good kasha. Maybe that's why. Now again, you can say, what's the other examples in the? Well, it's about bito, about bas bito, about bas benos. There's other examples too. Meaning the point of the Mishnah later on is saying these are not chayve krisos necessarily. These are chayve misas peasant. You're right. The example the Gemara happened to give is bito, but if it was bas beno, then it'd be paying your son. If it was bas bito, you'd be paying your daughter. But yeah, it's good kasha. Presumably that's the answer. So that's just one example, but maybe there are other examples too. So the point is that the Tana can't be Rav Meir because again, you'd have a problem with the Mishnah in tomorrow's daf. Okay, so maybe the Tana of the Mishnah could be Nechuni ben Akana. Who's Nechuni ben Akana? So if you recall, this takes us back to last week or earlier this week, I don't know when, but one of the days in the beginning of the parak, Nechuni ben Akana had a shita. It's brought down in Masechah Shavuos that notwithstanding, right, we know there's Kimle b'Rabbamineh, and therefore the case in Shavuos is, let's say a person is madlik Gadish Chavero b'Shabbos, a person does Chilul Shabbos and he's mazik his fields, his friend's field, because he's chayiv stila, he's going to be pater. What if he did it on Yom Kippur, where he's only chayiv karetz? So the Chuni ben Akana said he learned from Xera Shabbat a son, that the same way you're pater if you do it on Shabbos, you're also pater if you do it on Yom Kippur. Okay, so what does that have to do with us? The Gemara is saying again, we had the stira between the sugya, between the Mishnah in Ksubas and the Mishnah in Makos. And the Gemara wants to say now that Nechuni ben Akana, because of his shita that we know regarding Madlik, Gadish, Chavera, B'Yom Kippur, he would also have to hold that a person can be chayiv both Mammon and Malchus. How does he know? Because Nechuni ben Akana said that when a person lights his friend's field on Yom Kippur, he's pater from the Mammon. It sounds like, and this is, well, he's going to get killed, but it's kares. It's bidei shmai, not bidei adam. So why did he have to come on to that? The way Rashi speaks this out is every single time a person's chayiv kares, with the exception of a few chayiv assays like Bris and Pesach, but every single time a person's chayiv kares, he's also chayiv malchus. There's always a lot. So if Nechuni ben Akana held that when a person's chayiv malchus, he's not chayiv mammon, he wouldn't have needed to come on to the case of Yom Kippur. He would have said, well, if you're madlik gadish chavero, you're pater. Why are you pater? Because you're chayiv malchus. And the fact that you said you're pater because you're chayiv kares, that proves that the malchus alone wouldn't be enough to do it. So the Gemara is now suggesting, so maybe if it can't be Rav Meir to answer up our stira, maybe it could be Rav Nechuni ben Akana. He holds that a person can be chayiv malchus and mammon. Maybe he's the Tan of the Mishnah here in Ksubas that says you're chayiv the mammon, and the Mishnah in Makos that says you're chayiv malchus. But the Gemara says kind of an obvious kasha, right? Rav Nechuni ben Akana kasha achosa. But the problem with Nechuni ben Akana is what the Gemara said a few blot ago. Our Mishnah says that when a person's ma'anes, various chayiv krisos like achoso, and the Gemara had a whole laundry list of girls, you are chayiv to pay a knas. Rav Nechuni ben Akana would say you're pater to pay a knas because of killing b'Rabbamineh. So it can't be Rav Meir, it can't be Rav Nechuni ben Akana. So the Gemara says maybe it's Rav Yitzchak. Maybe the town of our Mishnah is Rav Yitzchak. Who's Rav Yitzchak? So if you look in the Mishnah in Makos, which said Elu Heina Lokin, and it gave our list of women, from honest, these women, your chayiv malchus, there was another Tana in the Mishnah over there, and it was Rav Yitzchak, and he disagreed. He said, I don't hold that you're chayiv malchus in this case. I don't hold that every single time you're chayiv kares, you're chayiv malchus. So again, maybe he could be the author of our Mishnah, because again, you're not going to have a stira between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Makos if the author of our Mishnah is the guy who argues with the Mishnah in Makos, right? The problem is the Gemara understands that Rav Yitzchak, notwithstanding the fact that he doesn't say you get malchus when there's kares, he does say you get malchus. Sorry, he does not say you would get mammon and malchus. And the problem is, Ikra Rav Yitzchak, Kasha Mamzeres. One of the other girls listed in our Mishnah was a Chayve Lav, it was a Mamzeres, and we say you get a Knas. According to Rav Yitzchak, he would say that a Mamzeres gets malchus. Everyone agrees on Mamzeres is going to get malchus, and therefore you wouldn't have to pay the Knas. So long story short, we're trying to understand, according to the way Rabbah was understanding the Rav Meir Shita yesterday, who is the author of our Mishnah? It can't be Rav Meir because we have a kasha from the Mishnah later on. It can't be Rav Nechuni ben Akana because he would never say that you pay a knas and be chayiv kares. It can't be Rav Yitzchak because he would never say that you're chayiv mammon and malchus. And clearly, one of the cases in our Mishnah is a girl who you'd be chayiv malchus, is a chayiv lavin like a mamzer or a mamzeres. But the Gemara says, and this really takes us back to the beginning of today's daf. I can make this work if you hold like Rav Yochanan. Which Rav Yochanan? The Rav Yochanan said that when you're chayiv malchus and mammon, and for whatever reason you can't be chayiv the malchus because there wasn't hasra, you're chayiv mammon. I can make this all work because hunami mitaritz like Rav Yochanan. We'll understand the stira in the two Mishnayos the exact same way Rav Yochanan understood, which is to say that who's the Tana of our Mishnah? It's the Rabbanan. How could you be chayiv malchus and mammon? He'll say no. I'll make a new kimta. The Mishnah in Makos, that's when there was Asra. The Mishnah in Ksubis, that's where there was no Asra. And therefore, you're chayiv the Mammon, because you're not chayiv the Malchus. That's how I'll understand. But the Gemara says, Eli Yisavar Reish Lakish. But if you're going to hold like Reish Lakish, who says that anytime you're chayiv Malchus and Mammon, and you can't be chayiv the Malchus, you're putter from the Mammon, who is the Tana of our Mishnah? So the Gemara says, you're right. So the Gemara says, you're right. Al Karachach, Rav Yochanan severely. Rabbah's not going to have a choice. The way Rabbah understood the sugya, he's going to have to go l'pishitas Rav Yochanan. Okay. So Amar le Rav Masna la Baya the Reish Lakish. Now, according to Reish Lakish, right, who again, say it one more time. I think we've said this 10 times today. We'll say it one more time. According to Reish Lakish, shitas Reish Lakish is that when a person's chayiv malchus and mammon, and for whatever reason he can't be chayiv the malchus, he's going to be pater the mammon as well. So according to Reish Lakish Shita, the Amar beferish Rav Satorah, chayve malchus, chayve misos, and therefore, if you can't be chayiv the malchus for whatever reason, out of some technicality, you're not going to be chayiv the mammon either. Mantana the pulag alei Reb Nechoni ben Akana. Reb Nechoni ben Akana Shita in Masechah Shavuos, and that we saw earlier this week and earlier today. His Shita was that when you're madlik a gadish on Yom Kippur, you're over Yom Kippur, and you're also mazik your friend, you are putter to pay. Why? Because Kinley b'dravimine, and he holds that applies by kares too. But there are people that argue with the Nechoni ben Akana. They say that you're chai. Now we just spoke out not that long ago that every single case of kares involves malchus as well, right? So in theory, if you're Reish Lakish, you should say that if a person should be chayiv malchus and he can't be chayiv malchus for whatever reason, i.e., he's chayiv kares, you should be putter the mammon. But we know that Reb Nechoni ben Akana is a das yafet. He's the one that says that when you burn someone's field in Yom Kippur, you're putter from mammon, which implies that obviously people argue and people say you're chayiv mammon. But according to Reish Lakish, who would have that shita? I don't understand. Shouldn't, according to Reish Lakish, if you're chayiv malchus, or if you're supposed to be chayiv malchus, you should be putter from mammon. So who argues with Nechoni ben Akana and says that in this case you'd be chayiv mammon? So again, if you're, he would say, Rav Meir, Rav Yitzchak. Reish Lakish will say, I can tell you either it's Shitas Rav Meir, who just disagrees with this entire premise, and Rav Meir says, I hold a person can be chayiv mammon and malchus. So it could be him, or it could be Rav Yitzchak. Who's Rav Yitzchak? We spoke out before. Rav Yitzchak's shita was that when you're chayiv kares, you're not necessarily chayiv malchus. He disagreed with the Mishnah over there in Malchus. So he'll say that you're right. Ordinarily, when a person's chayiv malchus or supposed to be chayiv malchus, he'll never be chayiv mammon. But I'll tell you, in the case of where someone is over Yom Kippur, where someone does a malacha on Yom Kippur, he's chayiv kares, but he's not chayiv malchus. And because he's not chayiv malchus, he can also be chayiv mammon. So it's up to you guys. I don't know what time it is. We can 7:36. I think it's kedai to just go to the next page. It's not our sugya, but it's also not tomorrow's sugya, and it's pretty schmuck. So we all have a few more minutes. Want to just keep going? All right. So we started this parak, and we gave a laundry list of women that if you are ma'anes them, you're gonna pay a knas. And these women, a lot of them, they were not ksheros, they were psulos. A lot of them were chayve lavin, a lot of them were chayve krisis. The Gemara asked right in the beginning of the sugya, the Gemara said, I don't understand. Why are these girls even subject to these rules? We know the pasuk says below tieli isha, that after the parsha of ma'anes and the fata, you have to marry them. And how could you marry a mamzeros? How could you marry a chayve lav? How could you marry a chayve krisis? And what did the Gemara answer? The Gemara said, Reish Lakish said, no, we have a specific limud nara, ha nara, or basula, ha basula. And therefore you're right, ordinarily you shouldn't be able to marry them. Here it's different. And then the Gemara said, by the way, you should know that this is not agreed upon by all. Because the Gemara said, they had a brisa, and it said, below tieli isha, Shimon mani omer, Isha sheyesh b'havaya. The entire parsha of Ones and Mafata only applies to a woman where kedusha would be topes. And Rav Shimon Manasseh said, Isha haruya l'kaima, not necessarily a woman that kedusha is topes, but a woman that you would be allowed to stay married to. Right? Lafuke, let's say I'm Mamzer. So then we got into a whole discussion. Kiva, what's the nafkamina between the two? But okay. New brisa, Tan Ravan, Arias, Ushnios la Arias, Ein lehen lo knas, below pitu. If you're ma'anis on erva or Shnios la Arias, you're not going to owe the knas, meaning that the parsha of onus doesn't apply and the parsha of mafata doesn't apply. Obviously, this is not like our Mishnah. This is one of the other opinions. Different case, Hamam Enes. So you have a woman, right? We know from Yavamas, we're very familiar with the Hamam Enes. So you have a woman that was married to Rabbanan, to a person, and she got out of the marriage. Ein lo knas below pitu. She's also not subject to the halachas of ones and mafata. Why? Rashi points out because she's b'cheskas be'ula, and therefore this wouldn't apply. Islandess ein lo knas below pitu. Similarly, a woman who's an islandess is not subject to the laws of ones and mafata. Why? Because she's not a nara. She doesn't have simanei naras. Hotzas mishum shemra, a woman who, let's say, a person married a woman, and he said pesach suach matzasi, whatever it is. This woman also is ein lo knas below pitu. She's not subject to ones and mafata again because she's presumed to be a beula. So the Gemara says, "My arayis, umay shnius la'arayis." What is the case of arayis and what is the case of shnius la'arayis? Ilema arayis mamish. If you're going to tell me the case of arayis is, arayis mamish. Arayis midiraisa, and shnius is midivrei sofrim, and shnius are just arayis midrabanan, kevan dimidiraisa chazdile amai ema and knas. So then I don't really understand the brisa because in the case of shnius, granted, you're right, midrabanan, you're not allowed to marry them, they're arayis, but bottom line is midiraisa, you're allowed to marry them. So why would they be excluded from the parsha of ones and mafata? So Ella, the Gemara says, arayis chayve misos bezin. You're going to have to tell me that arayis are chayve misos bezin, like we're going to see on Vav and Beis. Shnios, when the Brisa says shnios, it's not referring to shnios like the Rabbanan, the way we understood it back in Yivamas, but it's chayve krisos. Aval chayve lavin, yesh len knas. But then women that are chayve lavin would be subject to this whole parsha of onus and mafata. Umani shemanate mani. So it must be that shemanate mani who said that lo tieli isha, that it's women sheyesh ba havaya, and therefore the parsha of onus and mafata wouldn't apply to women where kedushin wouldn't be topes, but it would apply to chayve lavin such as mamzeres. Ikada amri, there's another version of this, very similar. Arayas are chayve misas bezin chayve krisos. When the Brisa says arayas are not subject to the din of onus and mafata, it's talking about not only chayve misas bezin but also chayve krisos. Shnios are chayve lavin like mamzeres, and money. And who is this? Rav Shimon ben Manasseh. This was the second of those shitas. This is Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, who said that it's Isha and Royal Akaima. I may have flipped those shitas, but you get the idea. All right. Shkaya.
Somebody give me a ride.